Many immigrants think that they need a police report to actually file a VAWA self-petition. In today's live, I'm going to break down the evidence that you can use to definitely prove that you have been a victim of abuse. So if you're married to a citizen or a permanent resident and you're an immigrant without a green card, keep on watching. And in today's episode, I'll show you how to prove your VAWA case. All right. Welcome in our Facebook group. I'm not sure what's going on there, but the live isn't showing on there. But we're gonna, take that out for now. But those of you watching on YouTube, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm here in Charlotte live, telling you all how to prove your VAWA case. I help immigrants nationwide, so if you need help as we're going through this and you are looking for an immigration attorney, you can certainly reach out to me for that one-on-one conversation. All right. So today's episode 2 of our VAWA series that we started last week. So those of you that joined, thank you very much. It was a very action-packed live, right? We had lots of interactions there and lots of value teaching you about VAWA, right? We talked about what it means to qualify for a VAWA self-petition, just defining VAWA in general. So those of you that joined, thank you very much. That was very insightful. All right, today we're just diving right into the types of evidence that you need, because once you qualify for VAWA, right, it matters the way you present your evidence, because that's going to determine the type of decision that you get. So today I'm going to show you some evidence that I've used in the past with my clients that I work with, or evidence that has definitely worked out because they all have their green cards now, both men and women, right? So we're going to talk about all those types of evidence during this live. And again, if you have questions as we're going through the material, feel free to ask in the comments. All right. So on today's topic, what we're really going to focus on today is our, evidence, right? Breaking down different types of abuse and how the evidence can really apply to all those different types. We're going to talk about primary versus secondary evidence. And then we're also going to talk about your statements and declarations. That is a big part of your VAWA case, right? And how it all comes together. All right. Keep in mind that the benefit of filing a self-petition is so that you can get your green card. All right. This is not about your spouse or reporting them to USCIS, because again, your spouse is a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, and they don't really need a green card, right? But if they've been doing things to you at home that just isn't right, and you're not able to speak up, right? You're not able to get your green card because they refuse to help you, right? Those things, those incidents together can help you build a case for self-petition, because you need to move on with your life, right? Even though you're not required to divorce this person, right? You can still be married to your abuser, right? And divorce is going to be ultimately up to you. Right? If you're still married to your abuser, that's fine, but you need to be able to work and have some independence in your life. That's why a self-petition exists. All right. So if you missed out on last week and this is your first time joining in, I encourage you to just check out that material, because that will help you build that foundation to understand what we're talking about today, which is the evidence. All right. So let me know again in the comments where you're watching from. I'll be looking out, and if I see any questions while we're going through it, I will pause and answer your question live. All right. Thank you all for being here. Okay, so now going into the material for today, I'm going to tell you about 2 types of evidence that you could find in a VAWA case, right? So if you qualify, right, because you've been a victim of abuse and you're now needing to file this case, how do you actually present it? So there are 2 types of evidence, right? This is how you show that you can get your green card and you shouldn't be deported, right? Because without this status, without qualifying for any status, right, you're here unlawfully, you'll be deported. That's pretty much what happens. So in order to avoid that deportation, you need to be able to provide this evidence to show that you've been a victim, right, and you're entitled to the relief. Okay, so even if you're already in court, you can still file this. I talked about this in the previous live as well, how VAWA relief is presented in court, right? But if you're not in court yet, you haven't been picked up yet, thankfully, right? You can then qualify using this type of evidence. So let's talk about the primary evidence. All right, welcome in, John. Thank you for being here. John is watching from PH. All right, is that the Philippines? Yeah, okay, I see the flag. Thank you very much, John, from the Philippines. Wow, so cool. This is why I love, what I do here, being a virtual immigration attorney, and also just having access to the internet. That's something to be very thankful for, because we can reach people all around the world who are going through this same type of situation, but they may not have, had the opportunity to hear it. Nobody's telling them where they live. So the internet brings us all together. So thank you all watching from around the world. And make sure you share this live as well with your friends. If you're just seeing this after it's aired and you're not here right now, just share it with someone who may need it, because when we talk about the evidence that you need, right, you can see that proof of relationship is number one. So many people neglect that aspect of it because they think this is an abuse case, so I don't have a police report, so I'm just going to focus on that, right? That's just one of the evidence, right? And not even a required one, as you can see. It's a secondary evidence. So, but proof of relationship is top priority before you can even begin to qualify for a self-petition, right? You need a spouse, a parent, or a child as a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident that is somehow holding you back from getting your green card, all right? And once you have proof of the relationship, you need to show proof of the abuse. And as we go along, I'll tell you different ways you can show abuse, right? Especially abuse that's non-physical, because that's the more common type of abuse. But a lot of people just focus on physical abuse, like where they're punching you and there's bruises and all of that, okay? So you also need proof of residency in the U.S., right? And also that you've lived with the abuser at some point. Those are going to be key in your application, because in order to claim the abuse, you need to show that you were living together and the abuse was happening, right? Because it was a real marriage, right? So in every real marriage, there's marital problems, right? So abuse is something much more than just typical marital problems where you're just bickering and maybe having little fights here and there. Abuse goes deeper into psychological control, and you'll see that through the words that the abuser is using when you have fights, right? So for that type of evidence, you can provide letters and statements, right, from other people who witnessed your abuser saying these things, right? That's secondary evidence. So you can see how there's so many other things you can use that are not even police reports, right? Because when your spouse was cursing you out and yelling at home, you most likely didn't call the police, because you didn't think it was anything that required calling the police. So many people overlook this type of situation in their home, and they end up just staying in that situation much longer than they needed to, and just losing the opportunity to get a green card. All right. So like I said, the number one evidence, the top primary evidence, is good faith marriage. And without good faith marriage, you really cannot claim that relationship to be abusive, because it has to be good before it turned bad, because otherwise you don't know this person, okay? So the USCIS is looking for the real reason why you married this person that wasn't just to get your green card. And That's evident sometimes if you live together, you have a child together, you have a joint account together, you have property together, because you are actually building a life. That's what building a life is called, right? So if you're not able to answer the reason why you married this person, especially when you married so quickly, right? If you're not able to answer those questions, you most likely will not qualify for a VAWA self-petition. And this is why evaluation is highly, highly recommended. Because if you don't evaluate the case from bona fide marriage to abuse, there's a risk that even though you've been abused, right, you'll still get denied and deported, right, because you fail to show that maybe the lack of bona fide evidence is because of the abuse, right? So you just can't throw it in that way. You have to make a clear timeline as to why you don't have certain things. All right, perhaps your spouse refused to put your name on documents because they wanted to have control over you. That's one way to explain why there's no bona fide evidence, bona fide relationship evidence. All right, so, but it still has to be a good faith marriage. If you just don't have evidence of it, you need to certainly explain that. Otherwise, they're going to question whether your case is a real case, whether this is a real claim, or if you're just trying to get a green card, right? And that's not uncommon, right? Because there's different examples of fraud cases where people even provide fraud evidence or like fake evidence and things like that just to get the benefit, right? So it's not uncommon for them to question your application, all right? So if you have a short marriage, right, you haven't been married too long, and then you're claiming abuse, you certainly need professional guidance, right? Or if you don't have any children or really any strong evidence of shared life. I have a client that came to me last week or so. Was it earlier this week? This is Friday. And she said, we've been married for a year, right? We got divorced. In her case, she already has a green card, actually. But the thing is, to prove bona fide relationship for her 10-year green card, she said they've been living in a van, like doing like van life, touring around the US, and they just never had a lease, didn't really have, any evidence, but there was some abandonment, abuse, and now they're divorced. She just doesn't know how to prove it was real. So this is certainly a challenge, because without joint accounts, joint residence, or a child, or something that really shows that you're involved in your day-to-day, it's going to be tough. Right, so for this client, I believe she did sign up as a client, because we talked about how to overcome that challenge, because it is a big challenge for any type of abuse-based case. If it's abuse waiver for a removal of conditions, or a straight VAWA case for a 10-year green card, right? So we're going to have to really think about the timeline, because I asked her, did you all stop at gas stations? Were you taking pictures of every location that you were at? Because it's like an adventure, right, for a whole year. We're going to have to manually create that timeline to show that they were really spending their days together. Otherwise, she'll have a hard time. So this is very, very important, guys. And I'm ready to answer your questions about this if you're feeling confused right now. All right, the goal here is to help you get more informed, right? So you can have more confidence going into this. So don't feel discouraged right now. If you feel as though you just don't have that perfect timeline, I can be able to guide you to get, strong proof, thinking outside the box and doing things that, you may never have really thought about. So just reach out to me. Let's work through that together. Okay. So evidence number 2 that is certainly required, this is actually one of the top requirements, right? Because aside from a police report, there still needs to be your report and your statements on what exactly went down. Okay. In your statement, you're going to start with how you met this person and how the abuse actually started, right? Because if you can't tell that story yourself, right, and somebody else has to tell it for you, that's also going to raise suspicion on the validity of your case. So you need to be able to make this statement under the penalty of perjury, because that's the new thing now, even with the interviews. I told you all about that last week, I believe, episode 1, VAWA 101. Talked about the new trend for interviews with VAWA self-petitions. That's what's happening right now. USCIS officers will ask you to make your statement, again, a new statement when you're at the interview. So whatever statements you wrote down, whatever statements you're telling yourself, whatever is your reality, because sometimes everyone has a different perception of what went down. If you have friends and family who witnessed, who would help you, you have your therapist, make sure you understand the timeline of how the abuse really started, all the specific examples of threats, right? Threatening to call ICE, threatening to have you deported, whatever it is, right? So make sure you know those examples, make sure you're prepared to answer those questions in front of whoever, right? Just know your story and set the record straight, right? Because it's your story, all right? If you need help, again, understanding where to even begin, what your story really is, or if you're even really being abused, right? Because some people tell me different things that they're experiencing, and they say they then add a qualifying statement, right, to minimize. They're like, oh no, not every time, or she didn't really mean that. The other client I talked to the other day said his wife had like some mental disorder or something, and so it really wasn't her, it was just a mental disorder. I was like, well, are you a doctor? That's why I asked him, are you a doctor? Because it's not your responsibility to be dealing with this person and this mental disorder. They need help. And, right now you're just a punching bag and you're just enabling the behavior. So I'm not saying you need to divorce your spouse, right? So divorce is not always feasible for a lot of people that I work with. So you don't have to divorce your spouse, but you need to get that freedom to know that you can work legally, right? You can travel if you need to. You can just have the option to be free. Okay, a lot of the victims are isolated from their families because they don't have a green card and they don't know how to speak up about it. Because every time they do, the spouse will get upset and they don't provide the relevant documents, right? They just hold you back. But they told you they were going to help you. That's why you even got married in the first place. And now you're here. It's been years. Right? So don't let that be you. Make a change right now. If you're going through any of these situations that I've been talking about here, you can reach out for a confidential conversation about this. All right? So if you have your proof of your abuse, that will be another primary evidence that you need, right? Your statement will explain the abuse, tell us what happened, the timeline, everything, and then you need proof to back up what you just said. Okay? All of these types of evidence right here that I'll call secondary evidence would help you as supporting evidence, right, to your statement. So if you're watching right now, you can take a screenshot just so you can know other evidence aside from a police report that works for a VAWA case. Like I said, I've had clients over the years get approved on these secondary evidence because really when things are happening behind closed doors, if you don't call the police, again, it's really going to come down to your account of what happened. And then also your mental health records, because when you're going through abuse, all those words that they say, all those things that they do to keep you in line, right? It'll somehow lead to anxiety and other physical symptoms. Some people are not eating. I saw a lady the other day. Her complexion was completely changed. Like her physical appearance was just completely changed because she was going through a lot of emotional trauma and abuse. I think her husband actually had a camera in the house and was monitoring her every move. It was insane. I bet if she went to a doctor, it would probably show that she had high blood pressure or something. Because he will do all these things, come home, beat her up, blame her for all sorts of things, and it's just a mess. Right, so if you have any family members, any friends, or anyone who helped you during that time, they could also write a statement. All of that, again, secondary evidence that comes together for your proof of abuse. All right, you can get photos of your bruises, your injuries. If it's physical abuse, to your property, sometimes they punch the wall, break your things, throw your clothes out in the streets, those type of things. You can take pictures and that's evidence. All right, so here's how you can use all these evidence I mentioned, all these secondary evidence, how you can use it in practice, right, in real life. So if you're filing a self-petition right now and you're not sure how it really fits into your evidence, right, like what evidence can really prove what, here you go. This is a guide that you can also screenshot right now that you can use. Because if you look in your phone, you find out that you actually already have a lot of this evidence. Right? So a police report, while it's really great if you have it, because sometimes maybe the neighbors will call the police or something like that will happen. It's really great if you have it, but it's just not required. Like, it's just not. So if it's physical abuse, definitely call the police. Definitely call the police. But if you haven't called the police yet, you can always provide text messages, right, to show how your spouse manipulates and controls you, right? You can even use text messages to show proof of financial abuse. That's how cool it is, right? Because it's, again, what's happening in front of you, what's happening in your home is usually just between you and your spouse. Like you're the one going through the torture and all that. So they're texting you at work, showing up at your job, doing things that don't even make sense. So you take screenshots, you can provide that as evidence. All right. Medical records, very important if there's been any form of sexual contact that was forced, because marital rape is a thing, if you only know that. Just because you're married to someone doesn't mean that they can take advantage of your body in a way that you don't approve of. So make sure you get some medical evaluation to prove that. Thank you, Dismas, for joining. I'm glad that you're getting some value from this. Make sure you share with your friends so they can also participate in today's episode, right? Today's episode is all about VAWA evidence that wins. And I've been showing you all the different types of evidence, secondary evidence that you can use to prove that you're a victim of abuse. If you haven't experienced physical abuse, right, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and other forms of cruelty will work as evidence for your VAWA case. All right, and again, keep in mind that if you do qualify for a self-petition, a VAWA self-petition, you can file your green card after your approval, and this would be your pathway to freedom. You can leave that abusive situation, just go ahead and build your life, build the life that you envisioned when you came to this country, right? You didn't come here to suffer, so keep that in mind. Save all the evidence. If you had to stay in a shelter because you were kicked out, all right, that's extreme cruelty. I have a client right now who I pretty much encouraged her to find a shelter because she was experiencing physical abuse. Her spouse choked her out twice, and she almost passed out in front of her 4-year-old child that they shared together, by the way. Insane. So I told her, listen, you need to find a shelter and leave that house because he's going to kill you. Like, I don't understand. Like, choking someone out, that's really their life force right here. So he's trying to kill you. And somehow he heard me in the spirit and he even kicked her out. I was like, good. So just go to a shelter, and with those records, right, we can prove your abuse. You already have a child together. That's good faith relationship right there because you're living together. You have a child. They had so much together, and this is what he's doing. Just because, I don't know, his own mental health issues. But again, it's not your responsibility to take care of someone else's mental health. So you need to free yourself from that. Make sure they get help, or I hope they get help, right? You don't even have to make sure. Just, I hope they seek help. Because really, you have to focus on yourself and how you can get out of immigration issues, out of just deportation, right? Because some people just don't have any other option and they're waiting on their spouse. You just need to get out of that. So that's why I'm sharing this today. It's episode 2. If you missed out on the first episode, just check it out on YouTube. It's there, so you can catch up on the foundation of a VAWA case and then know what type of evidence you need to move forward. All right. So primary evidence number 3 is proof of your good moral character. Because while you are a victim of abuse, it is also important that you show that you yourself as the immigrant hasn't committed crimes or violated your immigrant status in a way that disqualifies you. Okay, welcome in to those of you just joining. Let me know in the comments where you're joining from. I'm here in Charlotte. Dismas, your name sounds familiar. Where are you watching me from? Have you been in one of my lives before? So, if you're applying for a VAWA self-petition, you need to be a person of good moral character, right? And the simple way to prove that is by getting your FBI records, your fingerprints taken. So when it comes back clean, and then we know there are no issues. Sometimes it comes back with issues, and we'll still have to see what those charges are, if it's tied to the abuse, right? Or if it's something that will not really affect your good moral character. That's going to be very important, okay? Dismas, you've been on my live before. You even sound like a client, but I don't know. Oh, wait, maybe I do know. Let me know where you're watching from. Mohammed, thanks for joining, and Uchenna, thank you for joining. Okay, so don't worry, right? If you have stuff on your record, don't worry. You could still overcome that, right? Just reach out to an attorney. Like I've said, that's how you figure out what, the ways around everything. With the law and immigration in general, there's always an alternative. You just can't know. Okay? So for those of you on YouTube, if you can see my screen, we're doing a deep dive into your statement, the declaration of abuse. This is the top three, one of the top three evidence. We talked about good faith relationship, proof of your statement, right, and then proof of abuse. So it's very important that you understand exactly how to write your statements, because this is something you can work on even before you have legal representation, right? Because it is your statement, again, your story. You have to know this for yourself before someone else can even, help you trying to get a case. You have to understand for yourself what abuse really is, how this has affected you. So let's look at the deep dive into a declaration and what really qualifies for a good declaration. Okay. So again, following the flow of the evidence, right, from good faith relationship, we're going to start with how you met. Okay, so you introduce yourself. Hi, I'm James, because again, VAWA applies to men and women, right? James, where you live, your current status, all that stuff. And then you're going to say, so-and-so introduced me to my wife. What's your wife's name? Someone give me a name in the comments. Okay, so now after you talk about yourself and how you met your spouse, you're going to then discuss things that you did that proves it's a real relationship, at least from your end, right? Because maybe you were paying the bills, you were sharing the bills, you lived together, you had a child together, right? You're going to discuss all of that in your statement. That's the first part of your statement. I just looked at one of the ones that I wrote for a client, one of my very first ones. It was like 10 pages. I was like, wow, there was a lot to say here, wasn't it? But it doesn't have to be 10 pages. It could be 5 pages, thereabout. Just starting from the beginning, where you met, when, the context and all of that. And then you're going to talk about the good faith marriage, what they promised you. Maybe they know you didn't have your green card and they said they were going to file, right? You talk about that. And then what happened afterwards? Did they file? Did they start stalling? Did they start threatening to have you deported, right? That's when you go into the abuse, right? The history of the abuse. And it's important to know this story because even when you're talking to a therapist and when you're trying to break down your abuse and your experience, right, you need to really know the timeline of when it really started. When was the first time they ever hit you? When was the first time they ever choked you out? When was the first time they basically took all your money from the joint account without telling you? You need to know that information. All right. And then talk about the pattern of control and how it has affected you over time. This is how you get a very strong statement to support your claim for abuse. Right? So again, I'm sharing more tips for those of you who are currently working on a VAWA case, or if you haven't started yet and you're watching this right now and you know that it's about time you did something, right, to move yourself forward. These are 5 tips that will help you with that declaration to make it a strong declaration. All right. Make sure you're specific with the dates. Make sure you have screenshots to support some of your statements, right? Because if they said this in a text, you can have a screenshot to show how they said that. Okay, document repeated behavior and help the USCIS to connect the dots, right? Because if you're not telling the story coherently, they might not even really believe your story, right? Because it's not even making sense. Like, how is this situation linked to your immigration status? You know, when there have been threats to call ICE to have you deported, that's how it's linked. When they've refused to give you documents, like documents showing proof of income, for example, that's very common. Because they're like, oh, I don't want you to know how much I'm making. I'm like, I don't understand. Am I not your wife? Right? So connect the dots. Let's see how the abuse is tied to your status and how it's affecting you. Right? Use your own words. That's key. Very key, especially if you're going to be working with an attorney on filing your self-petition. When I tell my clients this, some of them are confused because they think that hiring me means that I'm going to write everything for them, like write their story. Like, my job in representing you is to help you understand your story, right? See the legal options in this pathway and actually help you file. But I'm not going to write your story because I'm a lawyer. I already know, I mean, there's just lawyers speak, right? And it just sounds, it doesn't sound real. It just sounds fake, basically. So using your own words is very important. Just say it how it is, right? You don't have to be fancy about it, because lawyers will be using fancy words. And I do guide my clients, right, with their statements to make sure that they're even talking about relevant situations, because sometimes you can just go on a rant. So the purpose of hiring a lawyer is to help you review your story and see if this is a valid story, if there's a pathway here, right? How can we make this a persuasive story? How can we point out the parts that matter so they can really connect the dots, right? That's what we help you do. Okay? Hello, Phoebe. I don't know if I said that right, but good to see you all here at this live. I've been talking about VAWA evidence that wins based on the evidence I've used in the past for my clients that now have their green cards through VAWA. So if you're in this situation where you are an immigrant without a green card, or maybe you have a 2-year green card and your spouse is becoming abusive or just changing or doing things that you're just not sure if it's abusive, but you know it's not right, just reach out to me. Let's talk about ways to help you get out of that situation. Okay, my number is on the screen and is also in the chat, so you can just click on the link and get on a call with me. Olua Benga, good to see you. Okay, one other tip that you should keep in mind for a self-petition is preparing for the interview and knowing that you're going to have to answer that question of why you didn't leave the abusive situation. That's one of the top questions in a VAWA-based interview, right? Because generally, when you're going through abuse, you want to file for a divorce and just basically leave, right? But as an immigrant, sometimes you may not have that option. You may not feel free to leave because there's a promise and there could also be the threat. So you have to be able to explain that in your statement, at an interview, and anytime you're talking to someone about your VAWA case. Okay? So I'll tell you all about this client that I worked with in 2021. He was one of my first VAWA clients when I just started really understanding the concept of this relief, because I started out with marriage-based green cards as one of my main case types, one of my focus in this practice, right? So when the marriage is good, everything is fun, newlyweds, there's wedding photos, it was just great. And then as time went on, I realized sometimes, the marriage goes bad, like things change. And that got me really thinking about the relief option for immigrants in that situation. Like, how do we help people who are married, right? They have good intentions at first, and then things change, and they still don't have their green card. So what do we do? That's how VAWA became a thing for me. I learned about it. And so this one client, he came to me that time, really just crying, just like this, like no jokes. About how his life has really gone down the drain because he's been in the U.S. for 14 years at a time, right? Being married to this U.S. citizen, and he still didn't have his green card. I was like, yes, this is the type of case I just learned about, so let's do this, right? While I felt so sorry for him, I was very excited to actually get on the case because he really had a clear example of a marriage. It was a bona fide relationship because clearly 14 years of marriage, right? Everything they've built together, everything. But his wife kept on telling him to just wait because to her, she didn't want him. That's what, my client said to me at the time. She thought that when he got his green card, she'll leave him to marry somebody else. So she was like, oh, we're just going to wait. And just wait became 14 years. That was insane. So every time we talked, he would really just be very emotional because he didn't really understand, because she wasn't doing anything, right? That's what he said to me. She obviously couldn't hit him, right? Because he was bigger, taller, so she wasn't hitting him. She wasn't doing anything, but she was controlling him. She would work at every job that he worked. She would check his phone every single time. Like, he just did not feel free at home. So it was hard for him to explain to other people on the outside what was going on until he met me. And I was like, yeah, let's do this. So we filed his self-petition, right? We're able to show that control, abuse, emotional torture, like it was just some psychological trauma, like beyond what I could explain. And for that to be one of my first cases, I mean, it was tough at the time, but looking back right now, it was really a good case because now he has his green card and, that's that. So it does work, guys. If you put together the right evidence, you can definitely win a VAWA case. Really just one of my top case examples there because I did that in a time when, it was a different administration, but just, in a time when people just didn't really know much about VAWA and weren't taking advantage of this. And I was able to get that man out of that situation. So definitely a win for all of us. So yay. Okay, so if you're gonna spend all that time putting all that evidence together, you're gonna file a VAWA case, you certainly don't want to end up with a denial because, like I mentioned in episode 1, VAWA is now taking up to 5 years. The timeline has certainly changed, and I think it's because of the interviews. Whatever they're trying to do right now with the interviews is probably going to add even more time to it. Thankfully, you can get your work permit while you're waiting and really still have a comfortable life, right? But it's going to take a while before you get called for an interview. So, yeah, so don't spend all that time and then end up making a mistake that could land you in a denial, right? So some of the top mistakes that people make is basically having a weak statement, right? Because their story is just not convincing. They didn't say the relevant things. They just gave summaries and said, he was abusive, I was sad, just very basic. They're not able to convince anyone. And then even more so, they don't have any proof of relationship and they're not able to connect the dots and let the USCIS know that perhaps they don't have this proof because they were in an abusive relationship. So they don't know how to do that. So with no proof of relationship, a weak statement, right, inconsistent timelines, right? You're just really heading to a denial, right? It's fake, fake, fake. That's one of the things. I mean, these are some of the triggers, right? Because there's just no timeline here. This just doesn't make any sense. No supporting evidence, nothing. All right. So if you want to apply for a self-petition, you know you qualify. You've been watching my videos and you qualify, right? You need to avoid vague statements in your declaration. You have to be more specific than saying he was abusive, right? And don't just list things that happen. Make sure you have a story, because again, this is what happened to you over time, right? There's always the red flags over time. So make sure you're taking note of everything that was happening, the timelines each month, on your birthday, on your anniversary, right? Because abusers love to ruin those days for people. So take note of that and give those examples. For proof of relationship, again, you're going to need to really show how you've lived together with the abuser and experienced that abuse, even if you separated and you're divorced now. So if it's been a long time, right, at least not over 2 years, you can still file. You just really need to show what you can for the timeline that you can and explain why you don't have the rest, right? It doesn't completely disqualify you, so keep that in mind. Okay, so more common mistakes with inconsistencies and lack of supporting evidence is really easy to avoid if you just have the right guidance. Trying to file VAWA on your own is really like, it's crazy. Probably like filing your taxes, maybe for me, because I'm never doing that. Filing my taxes by myself or doing something just very difficult, because it sounds plain on the face of it, right? Like, I'm married to a citizen, I've experienced abuse, and I can file for VAWA, right? But it's just not that straightforward if you don't understand what evidence really matters. If you're focused on the wrong thing, you're thinking about police reports or just thinking that maybe I can go to one therapy session and then that's fine, right? You end up just complicating your timeline. So don't make these mistakes, right? Make sure you can actually prove the abuse beyond just your statements. You have other people around you, your pastors, your neighbors, people who helped you when you had to run away at night, right? Just whoever. Just make sure you've talked to other people about this. And, a therapist will certainly be one of the best people that you can talk to, because it will also evaluate how this has affected you mentally, which is very good for your case. So keep all of that in mind. Okay, we're almost towards the end here, guys. So thank you all for still being here. I haven't seen any questions pop up, but I have some questions, though, that people have already asked before today that I'm going to go through at the end of this. And again, if you want to talk confidentially, you can reach out in my inbox, send me a DM, or just click on the link to book a time to speak on a phone or on a video chat. All right, so let's talk about some top VAWA questions that I get here and how I've helped other people navigate through those confusions. Yemi and MO, welcome in. We're almost towards the end of this live, so if you're just joining now, you probably have to catch up on YouTube, where I've just been talking about different VAWA evidences, all right? So that's been the focus for today, VAWA evidence. Next week, we're just going to get on live for a Q&A session. I know sometimes it's hard to talk in this public forums, right, especially about something this sensitive. So that's why I'm going to make myself available for one-on-one conversations. I've put the link to my calendar in the bio so we can have that. But if you're not able to join that one next week, we're going to be here again on Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, answering questions to help you all really navigate through this complicated immigration relief. it is available, but it's best that you get that guidance to avoid spending the time and the effort and then still ending up in removal, right? That's the worst nightmare in 2026. I'm just exhausted about it. But anyway, top VAWA questions that you would find here, not there. Okay, top VAWA questions. With number one being, do I need a police report to win? And the short answer is no, you do not, because many cases, especially cases I worked with personally, have been able to get approved without a police report, right? Even though it does help, you can just focus on what you have because every case is different, right? Maybe your situation does not involve physical abuse, so you never call the police. That makes sense, okay? Another top question that I get here is, can I mention abuse if he never hit me? Okay, this is one about emotional abuse. So yes, you can certainly file an abuse waiver, file a VAWA case if your abuser never hit you, actually, because again, emotional abuse, financial abuse, and other forms of psychological abuse all count for a VAWA case. Right? There's no specifics in the rules for what abuse means. It's just abuse and how it affects you, right? It's not physical. Okay, next question says, should I file a police report now, or is it too late? Well, if you didn't call the police when the incident happened, you might not be able to file a report, but, it really just depends on what happened. Sometimes you can call the police department to report an incident, especially if it's something where you feel fear for your life. Maybe you've been threatened and or you need help maybe picking up your stuff from the house. You need someone to be with you. You can still call the police and then ask if it's too late to file a report, on a previous incident. So you never really know. Just reach out to an attorney. Again, I'm an attorney here in Charlotte. I can help you if you call the number on the screen or text, right? Let's figure out if your situation can still help. And even if you didn't call the police, again, you don't need the report. So it's fine, okay? So just reach out. We'll figure out the best evidence that works for you. All right, this one says, what if I have no medical records, I guess to prove abuse? Yeah, so medical records, again, was part of the secondary evidence that I showed you all in the beginning. It is not a requirement, right? It's just something that could help, especially if you experienced any physical abuse, right, or sexual contact that a doctor can only evaluate to know, right? So medical record is not 100% required. It's just something that supports and helps. Okay, so most of the evidence for abuse are all secondary. The primary ones, the ones that you definitely need to have, we discussed earlier, right, is going to be proof of your relationship, proof of the abuse, right, and also your statement of abuse, because that's really one of the biggest proof of abuse. Okay, so those are the top three things you should just keep in mind, and don't worry too much about every other evidence. If you're watching me right now, don't just get confused, because this does not, it may not even apply to you. Okay, not every single thing you see online applies to you. Just reach out to a professional to know which ones you should really focus on at the moment. Okay, so that's it for today. Yay, TGI Friday. I'm ready for some lunch because my stomach's been growling. So let's just wrap up today's episode with the preview for next week. So I'm excited to keep showing up here every Friday for you all, sharing all of these tips and helping you understand your options to move forward. So next week, we're going to have a Q&A session where I'm going to answer your questions in real time. For those of you who can't join me one-on-one and you just want to talk in this setting, this will be the best time to join. All right, so bring your toughest VAWA questions, and any evidence that you have that you're not sure about, just anything that you need to clarify with a licensed professional, okay? Because I'm a licensed attorney. I'm here in Charlotte, but I help clients nationwide. So you can be sure that what I'm sharing with you right now is something that will definitely help your future, your future here in the U.S. versus jeopardize your chances of getting a green card. Because if you're filing frivolous applications and you're just not presenting your case in the right way, you're going to create complications for yourself. So let's not do that. Let's get help the first time. All right, so I'm excited for next week. I'll be here 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. All right, so I hope to see you next week. And again, schedule that confidential call with me. I'll be happy to talk to you then. Okay. Have a blessed day, guys. And I don't think I saw any more comments in the chat, any more questions, but feel free to reach out again or just leave your comments and I'll see if I'll reply you in the chats. All right. Have a blessed rest of your day. And I'll talk to you later. Bye.